What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to a special edition of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin and is presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, and that is One Pie Pizza. Find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. I'm your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro 2_ANT. In this special edition of Disguise Coverage, we are continuing the recent theme of diving into the Buffalo Bills offense in 2024 and forecasting who and what they will be in terms of schematics, in terms of personnel, in terms of usage rates and snap counts, and anything and everything as this Bills team undergoes a significant revamp of sorts, offensively and defensively, going into this year versus what they've been previously. And the reason this episode is a special edition is because, one, it's pre-recorded instead of being live on our normal Tuesday night slot. And the reason that this show is pre-recorded and not live is because I adjusted to accommodate an absolutely tremendous guest. That guest will be continuing the conversation with us today on that Buffalo Bills 2024 offensive outlook. I am joined by one of the best when it comes to anything and everything football, a guest that I am extremely excited to sit down with and talk ball with today. I am joined by Miss Mina Kimes. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for the applause, and thank you for having me on. As I said before we started, came highly recommended by a lot of fine folks on the football internet, many of whom I've had on my podcast. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I appreciated you saying it offline and then even more so when this is live. So it just kind of like gives me even more oomph and emphasis. I appreciate that so much. We'll get right into it. Make sure we'll get you in and out on time. So like I mentioned in the intro, and you've dabbled a bit in this conversation on Twitter, on NFL Live. You and Nate got into some small pieces when you did the QB draft last week, talking about Josh Allen, but just kind of leading off with, what are your expectations for this Bills offense schematically in 2024? They are undergoing changes. They're revamp, rebuild, depending on how you want to look at it. They're tweaking the offensive line a little bit. Stephon Diggs gets jettisoned out. They're bringing in different body types at the wide receiver position than they've traditionally gone with. Yeah. What are your expectations for this offense in 2024?
That is a big question that we could talk about for a long time. So you alluded to this. I just did a QB draft with Nate Tice. If you guys haven't listened to that, Mina Kimes show, you can watch it on YouTube. Josh Allen went second, which was, I think, where that was. We agreed on 1 and 2, and then it got a lot of spicy there. But we were both like, Josh Allen's obviously second, right? Which I don't think should be controversial. In a few weeks, I'm doing my top 10 offenses pod, and I think that'll probably come out long after this one. So spoiler alert, the Bills are still in the top 10, which I think not everybody might agree with right now because of the uncertainty around the skill players, the scheme, all of that. A lot of that flows from the fact that you have Josh Allen and pretty much, and it's the same with, honestly, last year with Patrick Mahomes. I was like, I'll still have him top 10. Now the difference is, actually the Chiefs offense did finish 8th in DVOA, I think. So when you have one of those guys, you're pretty good.
It just works.
But in the process of ranking them, and you guys can listen to find out where they do land, I spent a lot of time diving into the splits before and after the coordinator change, just to kind of try to figure out what changed, what got better, what got worse. And I'm sure you've done the same and thought about this a lot. And it's really interesting. And this, of course, is before Diggs left and Coleman arrived, which will change things even further. But I was trying to get a grasp of what really changed with Joe Brady, because, I wasn't wholeheartedly opposed to the switch at all, but the offense was good before. So, and and I know, it was good before, it was good after. In some ways, statistically, it actually was better before, but I think competition factors into that as well. But the biggest things that jumped out to me when I dove into the splits, because a lot of it actually looked pretty similar. I think the number one thing by far was and this is obvious to anyone who watched the Bills, particularly in some of the higher profile games at the end of the season, not just the willingness to run the ball, but the willingness to run the ball when situation was favorable to doing so. One thing that really jumped out to me, I was pulling these So Next Gen Stats has this great stat called run rate over expected. And you can actually parse that. I don't know if you've ever seen this into situational run rate over expected and formation. So before the coordinator change, the Bills were the 5th lowest based on situation, the 6th lowest based on formation, both negative, meaning they were less likely than average. Afterwards, ranked near the top of the NFL. And based on formation, they actually, Brady's Bills ran it at a 10.7% clip higher than expected, which is very, very high. So they were good running the ball before. They were good running the ball after. They were just more willing to do so. So I think that's something I expect to continue. We can dive into what that run game might look like. But to me, that was the single biggest change you saw. And then the other thing that really jumps out. Oh, I guess we should ask. They smashed the Josh Allen run more button more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Very
So
fair.
that's kind of something you always saw with the Bills with Josh Allen as the season progressed. I always kind of had a joke that there was like the breaking case of emergency glass anytime
Yes,
Josh
that exact.
Allen.
You could tell they were kind of just keeping him, be like, we don't want to do it unless we need it. And then it's like
So-
week 12 or 13, and they're like, we need it, smash it.
I don't know how much to put that on Brady or even to assume it's something we'll see in the beginning of the season again, but that's something obvious. But the other dramatic change, Anthony, that I noticed was just the usage of Stephon Diggs and how that changed the tenor of the offense, which is to say, if you look at Josh Allen's target depth and the route types, a lot of it looks the same, actually. Deep ball, same. Intermediate, same. The biggest difference is he just threw a lot more screens to Stephon Diggs, whose route profile became much more screen heavy, ISO heavy. Part of the reason why he wasn't as productive down the stretch. And you saw Shakir really emerge as this deep ball threat. So I don't know if that's something that will continue necessarily because Coleman's a very different player, for example. But that was something that really jumped out. Otherwise, the pass game was, pretty much equally effective before and after the switch.
I love that you led with the run game piece. I've been making the joke for maybe like 2 or 3 years that I've just wanted the Bills to shift. They were so pass heavy, and I thought if they could have a pivot in the run game, didn't have to be their number one option, but have a genuine pivot in the run game, it would just do wonders. And as they got better in the run, the offense opened up more. But then with the advent and prevalence of all the too high coverage structures and the pass heavy defenses we saw, a lot of them being built to stop offenses like the Bills and the Chiefs and put a cap on everything. I just kept having this joke. I was like, I just wanted them to switch to like this power run game, play action, bootleg, all this stuff, like kind of zig when everybody else is zagging. And that was a bit of what I loved with Joe Brady the most down the stretch. And you hit it on the head. I'm especially in the Bills circles, I think I was one of the more pro Ken Dorsey people. I didn't think as much was on his plate in terms of blame, as he just kind of got used as this blanket cure-all scapegoat. And anytime anything went wrong, if it was snowing and or rainy in Buffalo, everybody's like, God, Ken Dorsey sucks. Look at the weather today. It just really got out of control. But my biggest gripe with him was that lack of commitment to the run. Because even down the stretch in 2022, whether you're looking at it from a DVOA perspective, an EPA per attempt perspective, or just watching on the tape, they had a successful run game. I immediately think back to when they closed out the Saturday night game against the Dolphins in the snow in Buffalo.
Yeah.
And they're just leaning into their tackle wrap scheme. Something Brady did a ton against the Cowboys in 2023, where he just spammed it like what seemed like 30 times in that game. But Dorsey wouldn't fully commit to that run. And it felt like it took him a while to get into it and a while to feel it out. And I think that's a very good jump off point for what this offense will be in 2024, because I do expect the run to be heavily prevalent in this offense. They had one of the best ground games last year, whether you're looking at just Josh Allen, you're looking at just, running back carries. They were 7th in just running back carries with EPA per attempt. And then when you factor in Josh Allen in terms of what he can do from design runs, from the scramble game, and then how that works with what defenses are trying to throw at them, combined with the question marks that exist from a pass catching standpoint, I really feel like the run game, I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to be like a 60-40 split in terms of the run, but one of the better run teams in the league, one of the highest gap run usage rates last year. They were 3rd in the league. I expect close to like a 50-50 split with gap and zone. They're able to get into a lot of pieces, and especially early on when they're trying to figure out who they are offensively.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievably effective run game. You mentioned, even if you take out Josh Allen, that was kind of what Nate and I got into, which I feel like continues to be unappreciated, how unbelievably dominant and efficient Josh Allen is as a runner.
Yep.
He is very, very good. It heavily influences the way defenses play the run generally. But the other thing that really struck me when I was looking at some of the run stats I looked at before, after the change. It was always good. The question was just the commitment. But even if, so before they ran into a lot of light boxes because they were such a pass heavy team. You saw that the year before. Even if you take out light boxes from the Bills offense last year, they were still first in EPA per play and second in success rate running the football into neutral or stacked boxes, it speaks to a lot of things. I think the presence of Josh Allen, I think this is a very good run blocking offensive line. Obviously Morse is gone. We'll see how that affects things.
Yeah.
But I think the tackle duo has been, Spencer Brown, I thought was actually decent. And then, I think James Cook's a really good back too. So it's a really good run game. I guess for me, you asked me about the change in the offense. I kind of spoke to the changes we saw last year. Obviously, that was a mid-season change, right? Mm-hmm. So you're changing things on the fly. To me, the biggest question I have, aside from the wide receiver usage, which we can talk about and who plays what role, is can you make the rushing and passing attack feel more cohesive? And I think that would be the step towards, okay, this offense was really, really good after, it was good before, it was good after. Mm-hmm. How can we make sure that it's a top 5 offense in the NFL and also potentially compensate for, not having a true number 1 as they figure out who Keon Coleman is and how he fits into things? To me, a lot of that is, can we make all of these things tie together? We have this unbelievably dominant run game. Can we build RPO, play action pass attack off of that is as effective as the Rams, the Ravens, whatever, some of the teams across the NFL who I think do a better job with that.
I love when I bring people on who I think highly of and I respect, and I have no idea what you're about to say. I gave you some anchor points for our conversation, and I love when you start saying things that I was planning on saying or that are already in my brain. It just makes me feel so great. That's a huge one for me. More of a marriage of the run and the pass. I remember before the 2023 season, I was watching, I don't think it was a coaching clinic. I think it was an interview with Jeff Stoutland, the Eagles offensive line coach. And he was talking about how every run that they have a pass that goes along with it, where the setup, the design, everything looks the exact same, except it's just a pass instead of a run. And I was like, that seems like such a simple thing, but it's such an effective thing at the same time.
Yeah.
And I expect the Bills to lean into that more from a formational standpoint, given how their offense is built now with their pass catchers. And so much of successful offense, especially successful rushing attacks in the NFL now, teams like the 49ers, teams like the Ravens, teams like the Dolphins, and the Rams, although in a different perspective that I'll talk about in a quick second, they lean into kind of the uniqueness of the personnel that they have and use that to put defenses into a bind. You look at the Dolphins, who had a 42%, 21 personnel usage rate, highest in the league last year, because of the ability to use Alec Ingold as a blocker, or in all their RPO floods and everything that they try to do with McDaniel. And then you look at the Niners, who have Kyle Juszczyk and who just use him in every way, shape, and form. 36%, 21 personnel usage rate, 11%, 22 personnel usage rate. So 47% of the time they have 2 backs on the field, usually Juszczyk and McCaffrey. 60% of their snaps come with either 2 tight ends or 2 running backs because of what they can do with Kittle and how he's effective. And then you look at teams like the Lions, who had a 64%, 11 personnel usage rate, but were second in EPA per attempt for running back carries. And granted, some of this is because their offensive line is really good, but they had these bigger bodied wide receivers like Josh Reynolds and Donovan Peoples-Jones, who were second and third respectively in terms of wide receiver snaps. People see the pass catchers on that team, and rightfully so. You think Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporte, and then it's like, okay, can Jameson Williams be anything? But Reynolds and Peoples-Jones went a long way towards allowing them to stay in 11 and being able to access both the run and pass menu without having to switch out of 11. And then the Rams take that notion and dial it up to 1,000. They were 95% 11 personnel usage rate last year, and then were 6th in terms of EPA per attempt for running back carries. And that's, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are tremendous pass catchers and receivers. They're also very good run blockers. You can use them to insert and fit up on duo or just against second-level defenders, wash defenders down. And that's also something I expect the Bills to lean into, not just the matchup pieces they can create in 12 personnel with Kincaid and Knox, or in 11 with some of their bigger bodied and athletic receivers who are also good blockers, but being in those personnel groupings and being able to access more of the menu from a run and pass standpoint, putting defenses into a true bind because you don't know what's coming at you. And then I expect them to pair that with some more like Sean McVay type pieces in terms of condensed formations where you can really lean into adding more gaps around the line of scrimmage. You have less tells when you are in condensed formations because of the splits, both in terms of the formation and the offensive line.
Yeah.
I just think it just speaks to how they built this roster, and I feel like the identity they're going for in 2024 and potentially beyond.
Yeah, it's something I think we've kind of been waiting for from the Bills for a while. I think back to, you remember when Dable first got things really going with Josh Allen. They're one of the teams that used 10 personnel most in the league. And it was, a very, very different offense. And then we were like, okay, well, now it's changing. I remember, I think it was not last year, but maybe the year before down the stretch, they started using Reggie Gilliam on some key plays.
Yeah, in
I remember being like, this is happening. The Bills are doing it. Reggie Gilliam, it's happening. And then it didn't really happen. And then last year you draft Dalton Kincaid with your first round draft pick. And because of injuries to Dawson Knox, they don't really have that time to develop that 12 personnel grouping that we all expected. And look, even if it is quote 11 and a half, I think maybe Brandon Bean said that or something. Dalton Kincaid can still block a corner.
Yes, he's willing, he's functional, and
like even he's not George Kittle, but when Dawson Knox is on the field, he doesn't have to be George Kittle. He just has to beat up on a guy who's like much smaller than him.
Yeah.
So it's kind of been like stops and starts with regards to having a more diverse personnel offense. And to your point, I think it is something that we really see in the most successful offenses around the NFL. And when we break out personnel groupings now, they're really misleading. Like you talked about the Rams and everything they do out of 11. So that shows up as 96% 11, but it's not really an 11 personnel offense. The Ravens, for example, they use Patrick Ricard like a tight end now. So really it's like a 12 offense that was classified as 21. But the point is all of these offenses are able to present the illusion of complexity, as Sean McVay likes to call it, where everything looks the same and not only gives them an advantage in terms of getting the matchups that they want, getting, a tight end versus a linebacker in coverage, for example, or running the ball at a corner, if that is how the defense chooses to play them, but also sequencing plays together in a way that I think we just really haven't seen from Buffalo, because while I do think Dable was great, I do think Dorsey did a good job. I'm more pro Dorsey than others. I think Brady did a good job last year. The reality is much of the success of this team has not been scheme based. It's because you have an absolute mutant at quarterback. So I think my question is, can you create a more scheme based offense moving forward? And that is what remains to be seen.
And that's such a great segue to the next point that we're going to talk about. And yeah, I've joked a bunch on this show and just in different spaces that for years, like the Bills playbook, like if you opened it, it wasn't like actual plays and concepts. It was just like different pictures of Josh Allen, like doing athletic or like different things.
Josh Allen hurdling a dude.
That's exactly right. Or him like reaching back or like, and then like a couple like candid ones where he's like this and just different aspects. Like they really leaned into him being a unicorn and letting him be Josh Allen. And when it works, it's awesome. But then when you get to the end of the season and come playoff time, especially against, Lou Anarumo and Steve Spagnuolo and these guys who have everything that you are on tape, you're easier to scheme against because you're somewhat more siloed and you're somewhat more isolated. And yeah, I look for the schematics to play a heavy role. And it's part of the reason why I think there's so much pressure on Joe Brady this year, especially because I think what they've surrounded Allen with isn't a bad grouping, but I think it's more of a, like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts type in offense. And so I think there is that pressure on Brady to schematically figure out a way to use everybody. One quick point I also want to mention too, just to go back to that condensed formation aspect, the teams with the lowest formation width in 2023, the Niners were the lowest. The Rams were the second lowest.
Yeah, yep. We did a chart on this in the playoffs because I was pulling them and I was like, Jesus Christ, it's like every team left.
It was nuts. Yeah, it was literally Niners, Rams, Dolphins, Texans, and then Lions were the 5 lowest. And all teams with good run games, good pass attacks, good EPA per play and different metrics that you're looking at. That's one of the big ways that I think Joe Brady leans into the schematics, just those big-bodied receivers, condensed formations, reducing splits so you have less tells for defenses and just trying to add gaps every way they can, give themselves an advantage, then using that with under center play action. Also expect more motion and different little tweaks. When you look at Joe Brady, and because some of the conversation I feel like can be put onto Allen this year in terms of there's no Stephon Diggs. It's really your show. You don't have a true alpha or true pass catching target one. Even if you really like what Dalton Kincaid can be, he's not there yet. So I do think there's some pressure on Allen. But if you're looking at Brady and Allen, who do you think has more pressure? Do you think one of them far supersedes the other?
For the it's not Josh Allen is. I mean, this is like not a popular thing to say on national sports television, but Josh Allen has nothing to prove to me. He's already like I just
fair.
Someone who dramatically underestimated him in the draft, and obviously wasn't alone in that. He has exceeded every possible expectation I would have for him as a quarterback. And he's also, by the way, like I think there's such a misapprehension of his game, and it's so mischaracterized. I think I mentioned this with Nate, but it's kind of like the Bills offense is now kind of entering what Mahomes went through, right? Where Tyreek Hill's gone, with very different player from Stephon Diggs. But the point is you're going to have to become much more dependent on the quarterback and the scheme rather than the skill players to just win. And Josh Allen has to do that, no doubt. But Josh Allen also already went through the thing Patrick Mahomes went through where teams started playing him with too high. And he was like, okay, I'm just going to be an absolute assassin and slice you up underneath and be super accurate and decisive. And the ball is going to come out quick. I've seen Josh Allen win so many of those football games. Yeah. He is not a boomer bust quarterback. Sometimes he makes boneheaded decisions, no doubt, but they're usually born of, they're not born of like, I would say like him not seeing the field correctly. They're just born of him thinking like, yeah, I can hit this like, collapsing whole shot falling off of my back foot because I'm Josh Allen, which he should not do that sometimes, but it's just part of who he is. Joe Brady, on the other hand, I think the expectations are much higher because again, I go back to like, he came in and he replaced a good offensive coordinator who led a very successful offense for a few years. And that's not to say that the change is a bad idea. We'll see. I think it still has something that I think it's kind of a TBD for me. But because of that, there is more pressure on Joe Brady to evolve the scheme, to maintain the level of efficiency, and to do all the things we have been talking about in terms of integrating the run and the pass and sort of optimizing the group of skill players that they do have.
Yeah, I'm in lockstep with you there. Josh Allen's season last year was so odd. I always describe it as kind of like the yin and the yang of Josh Allen. And it just seemed like last year there was more of the yin, which is the bad one. I think we just saw more of that, like him going with more of those boneheaded type plays, but also at the same time, like he'll do those boneheaded plays a bunch and they work 70% of the time. And then it's like, well, 30% they don't. And I feel like last year it was more 50-50 or kind of like 60-40 with 60 being bad. And when it doesn't work, it's terrible. But when it does, you look at him and you're like, well, that's why he's Josh Allen. And I see what they built offensively in terms of surrounding the pieces around Allen. And it just feels very much like a bet on Josh Allen, but also a bet on Joe Brady. And we'll see what they do this year and how that affects 2025. And they should have some more cap space after the move with Diggs, but changing the offensive line, going with different body types and not going with your traditional, Allen's best seasons came with Cole Beasley and Stephon Diggs, guys with good release packages, guys who can win at any point in the route, at the release and the stem, on the break, declarative separators. And now they've gone with more bigger bodied frame type ball winners like a Keon Coleman, like a Mac Hollins. MBS has speed, but isn't this guy that's ready to route dudes up. He's more of kind of like a power slot, good blocker, vertical presence. Khalil Shakir can win in a variety of ways and is the closest thing I think they have to a true separator. But that's about one. And then Curtis Samuel is a fun athletic gadget. I think more of an auxiliary piece than he is a true, even more than he is a true two. And so I think this really is a bet on Joe Brady to maximize that value. And also looking into that, when you look at this Bills offense on paper, excluding Josh Allen, how good do you think this offense is, again, on paper, that's around him? And how much do you think is on him to elevate what is around him? You mentioned it kind of going in that Mahomesian trajectory in terms of being the trigger man or the talisman for that offense, distribute, be efficient, take what you can when you can with your arm and your legs, but really, no pun intended, quarterback the offense. how good are they on paper for you, and how much do you think is on Allen to elevate that grouping that he has?
Well, like I said, if I do have them in my top 10 still in terms of my projections for next year. I think if it was a different quarterback and you just slotted, a league average quarterback
Mm,
with this group of skill players, I would probably put them in the 15 to 25 range.
okay.
Um, in part because I think the run game, which is while it's dominant, I do think they really benefit from the presence of Allen. He is definitely going to have to be an elevator. That said, I do think that there are players that you can really build something interesting around because, as you said, some of the body types, the skill sets, we can worry about, okay, Keon Coleman, is he a true X receiver boundary guy, or do you want him in the slot? I've seen some discussion around that. And I think there's actually some flexibility there, especially if they lean more heavily on the 12 personnel groupings early on. And I think especially with what Shakir showed you at the end of last season, his ability to stretch the field vertically, I think will play a pretty big role in this offense. It should play a big role in this offense. But so much depends on either Kincaid taking that next step or Coleman being productive early on. And, those are wild cards, undeniably, because those are very young players.
And if they hit, it really can. I don't want to put like too much of a silver lining on it or a nice little neat and tidy bow, because I do think it is a big loss to lose someone of Stephon Diggs' caliber. Even if he's not necessarily the Stephon Diggs of old, I do think that's a big loss. But it's fun in terms of what they could potentially be. And it really ties into one of the points you mentioned earlier in this episode of, the Bills can be in 12 personnel from a personnel standpoint, but be running more 11 and 10 type of formations and going more spread because of how athletic Dawson Knox is and what Dalton Kincaid can be. And then the same thing with your 11 personnel. You can be in 11, but three of your receivers could be, Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, and MVS or Mac Hollins or whatever they want to do, or even Khalil Shakir with how he stepped up his game. And you can go more condensed, power, heavy type looks and formations. So that ability, I think, can really put defenses into a bind. And then you pair that with Josh Allen, with who he is as a passer, but being that +1 in the run game, then what they have from a running back run game standpoint. And the potential is there, I think, more so going down the road with how Keon Coleman develops, or even Kincaid to a degree. But like you said, so much of it is contingent upon, we really need this guy to hit. We really need that guy to hit. And they need to hit in specific ways, because if they don't, you can't maximize that skill set. And then you're almost kind of like a sitting duck.
Yeah, you'd like to see some similarities to, I think, what you've seen from the Chiefs over the last couple of years in terms of how they use their tight ends, the way they create opportunities for Travis Kelce against man coverage with their uses of bunch formations and quads looks. I think that the Bills could do some of that. But then again, some of that is really just about Dalton Kincaid developing as a player. I thought you saw last year some of the things I really liked about him as a prospect, the hands especially jump out. There was like a seam ball he caught from Allen near the end of the season where I saw him that reminded me so much of his college tape. And I thought, oh God, if we can just see a little bit more of that, I think where he can stretch the field vertically, he is very capable of that. But something that I think you'd want to see in year two, kind of referring to Kelce, is, okay, what about the chemistry on extended plays? Because that is, of course, one of Josh Allen's many superpowers. Kelce's ability to work his way back to Mahomes, to find those holes in zone coverage. That's something I think if you can see that from Kincaid this year, that will take this offense to another level. And it's something I do think he's capable of.
And it's something that Stephon Diggs was tremendous at with Allen, and for as much maligned as he was amongst Bills fans, Gabe Davis was also tremendous at that. That off-script scramble drill, Diggs and Davis were tremendous, and it's a huge piece of Allen's game and maximizing what he is with his legs and his arm. Mina, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to keep you on schedule. This conversation was awesome. I hope it was awesome for you as well. Just in case people don't know who you are, what you do, anything and everything, the floor is yours. Whatever you got, whatever you do, plug it, tell everybody everything you want.
Yeah, my football show is called the Mina Kimes Show, featuring Lenny. It comes out once a week now, twice during the football season. You can subscribe to it wherever you get your pods. It's also on YouTube, youtube.com/MattMinaKimes. We end up talking a lot of Bills because the Bills are always a very relevant team. So if you're listening to this and you're a Bills fan, which if you're not, that's really weird that you're listening to this podcast, go check it out. I think you'll like what you hear. It's funny. The conversation you alluded to with Orlovsky that got your attention. I think I was defending the Bills defense, actually,
were.
not the offense.
I was just taking advantage of you talking Bills, and I was like, shoot
No.
the shot and see what happens.
It really, I got a little bit chippy, I think, at someone. Because I just feel like the Bills defense, everyone's like, oh, they lost so many players. And I was like, yeah, but did we watch the players that they
lost and what they were kind of doing
that
and
name
how it wasn't
recognition
really
might be the issue here. Anyways, very excited as always to watch this next iteration of the Bills offense. I am a big Josh Allen proponent, if it's not been abundantly clear from this conversation.
No, you made it clear, and yeah, you nailed it in the QB draft episode with Nate Tice, which was awesome. I mean, everything you do is tremendous. Thank you very much for being here. That'll do it for us in this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please drop a like, turn on notifications for this playlist, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on the audio platforms, rate and review and subscribe. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about it. If you thought this episode was terrible, tell your enemies and try and ruin their day with it. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I'll see you next week. And as always, Godspeed and go Bills.